The new Netflix documentary, Mr. McMahon, pulls back the curtain on one of wrestling's most powerful figures within the company. And despite Vince's best attempt to have the documentary removed, with his attempt of purchasing it outright as he believed it misrepresented him to a mass audience, Netflix decided to plow ahead regardless, and rightfully so. Because if you're only somewhat familiar with Vince McMahon, this documentary will be an eye-opener. It covers nearly every major controversy linked to McMahon, spanning decades. It just doesn't revisit the high-profile cases like in the 1990 steroid trial or the tragic Chris Benoit incident. It also delves into lesser-known scandals such as the Ring Boy scandal, which has received less attention over the years. Additionally, the series explores harassment allegations involving WWE Hall of Famer Pat Patterson, who passed away in 2020. It even revisits the accusation from former WWE referee Rita Chatterton and provides a detailed look into the Janelle Grant lawsuit and related federal investigation. So here are some of my biggest reveals from the 6-part series, kicking things off with within the documentary, the phrase "women were like toys" was mentioned, and additionally, Trish Stratus reflects on the role of women during the Attitude Era, acknowledging that female performers were not considered true wrestlers, but were more like entertainment props within storylines. She also points out that this era of WWE was heavily influenced by popular media at the time like Jerry Springer and Howard Stern, where provocative and edgy content was prevalent. This includes controversial and demeaning moments in the ring, such as making female wrestlers strip or perform degrading acts, like Trish Stratus being forced to bark like a dog and undress in front of a live audience.
I am no pervert.
In addition to this, Tony Atlas, a former wrestler, also pointed out how women were more like pawns rather than respected figures within the business. However, this just reflected the culture at the time where female performers were often exploited for entertainment value. But this was further intensified by real-life sexual harassment claims made from women like Rita in the 80s and Sable in the late 90s. Although when asked about Sable, Vince apparently forgot that she even sued him, which is a bit odd. Overall, these incidents blurred the line between the on-screen storylines and behind-the-scenes behavior, raising uncomfortable questions about how women were mistreated during McMahon's time at the helm, as the documentary shines a light on these troubling moments, connecting them to McMahon's role in creating a toxic environment where women were often sometimes seen as disposable. But that toxic environment would reach a boiling point as Vince would come face to face with one of his top stars in the 90s. Vince McMahon's reputation as a ruthless businessman in the world of professional wrestling has been shaped by several infamous moments, with the 1997 Montreal Screwjob being one of the most notable ones. This event occurred between Bret the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels, where the predetermined outcome was changed without Hart's acknowledgement.
I beg your pardon?
Hart, who was leaving WWF for the rival promotion WCW, was scripted to retain his championship, but McMahon and his team conspired for him to lose the match, fearing that Hart may take his championship with him to WCW. So by most fans, the Montreal Screwjob is widely seen as a betrayal. However, McMahon famously defended his actions, saying that Hart needed to do the right thing for business. And the documentary highlights McMahon's unapologetic stance, showing that he prioritizes business over personal relationships, which is a reoccurring theme within his career. He went on to say that, "To this day, I don't regret anything that took place in Montreal." But this wasn't the first time McMahon pulled such a stunt. In 1995, he orchestrated a similar behind-the-scenes move with the women's champion Rindy Richter. And just like Bret Hart's case, McMahon treated it as a business decision rather than a personal one. His philosophy seems clear: the success of WWE comes first, even at the cost of loyalty or trust. These events cemented McMahon's image as a cutthroat operator who's willing to do whatever it takes to protect and grow his empire, no matter the personal cost to others. And his unapologetic attitude towards these moments only add to that image. Although the series did reveal something new, and that's Vince's side when it came to the aftermath of the whole Survivor Series incidents. As he states, he lives with no regrets, but he might have regretted going to see Bret after their match. In McMahon's words, the chaos of that night was all business. He recalls being ringside yelling at the timekeeper, ring the bell," even though Bret never tapped out. So McMahon made sure that he was there when the match ended, that Bret knew exactly who orchestrated the betrayal. After all, Vince McMahon felt like the title was his property and he had to take back what was his. So afterwards, when everyone was backstage, McMahon admits that he felt like he owed Bret Hart something for double crossing him. So in his words, he walked into Hart Hart's locker hands down and offered to give him one punch as he owed him that much. He was only met with a brutal punch to the temple apparently, which knocked him out. McMahon will go on to describe how he limped away with a concussion, yet even after that punch, he has no regrets, saying that it was all for the business. That being said, Bret Hart's side of the story is a whole different beast. Hart flat out dismisses the idea that McMahon offered him a free shot after the match. He will go on to say that that's just a load of bullshit. He says in the Netflix documentary that they didn't exchange any words. They clashed like it was another wrestling match. As McMahon came at him, Hart saw an opening, a chance for one perfect uppercut. He struck McMahon hard, knocking him out cold, describing it as like when you hit a bell and that thing goes up. McMahon went down, splashed out like a starfish, and Hart had zero remorse. He will go on to say it's probably the best thing he ever did that night, and that Vince deserved every bit of that. With both men walking away feeling justified, McMahon for defending his business and Hart for defending his honor. But the documentary wasn't all bad when shedding light on Vince's past. The opening episode of Mr. McMahon doesn't waste any time in diving into Vince McMahon's troubled childhood, setting the stage for the complex and often brutal man he would become. Growing up in a trailer park, Vince was raised in an abusive household by his mother and stepfather, who both left deep emotional scars on him. But the real turning point came when he was 12 years old, when his biological father, Vince McMahon Sr., re-entered his life. So in his own words, there was no heart-to-heart moment or any attempt to make up for lost time. Instead, their conversation was strict about business. Vince Sr. didn't just drop into his son's life as a dad, he showed up as a mentor in a cutthroat world of wrestling. Vince Jr. reflects on this relationship with a mix of admiration and unresolved tension. He admits that he always felt that his father wanted him to succeed, but not always fully. That tension came to a head when Vince Jr. bought the company from his father. And as he began transforming the world of wrestling in the early 80s, building WWE into the juggernaut it is now, there was a moment of unexpected validation. As Vince Jr. recalls his father finally acknowledging his success, saying, "You're beating all of them, I'm proud of what you've done. Them all." For Vince, it was a rare and profound moment where he felt like his father was truly in his corner for the first time. But that victory was bittersweet. Not long after expressing his pride, Vince Sr. passed away at the age of 69. In his final moments, the man who's never been openly affectionate towards his son finally told him he loved him. Vince recalls how much it meant to hear those words. Even though it came too late, he would go on to state it felt so good to hear. This tangled web of families, business, and loss didn't end with Vince Sr.'s death. That same dynamic, a blend of fierce competition and elusive affection, would later play in Vince's own relationship with his son Shane, continuing the complex legacy of the McMahon family, where the line between family and business has always been blurred in Vince's life, and that's a theme that haunts him to this day. But something else that may haunt Vince is the countless amount of wrestlers that died before the age of 40, and this was something that was touched upon in the documentary. Vince McMahon has always denied this, but in episode 4 of the Netflix documentary, he dismisses the idea that Owen Hart was being held back because of his brother. He will go on to say that this hypothesis that we're doing something against Owen Hart because of Bret, all this speaks to Bret's ego. Really, Bret? What do you think we're doing? We don't care about you. You left. We're trying to make a star out of Owen. But unfortunately, the real tragedy came in May 23 of 1999 when Owen Hart died after a stunt went horrifically wrong. He was being lowered from the rafters of the arena in a harness, a stunt meant to further his Blue Blazer character, but something went fatally wrong and Owen fell to his death in front of a live audience. The wrestling world was stunned, but perhaps even more controversial than the accident itself was McMahon's decision to continue the show. While Owen's lifeless body had been removed, his bloodstain remained on the ring mat. For fans and the wrestlers, the decision to carry on the event felt deeply unsettling. Vince, however, he stands by his choice. Though not everyone agrees with his reasoning, he maintains that it wasn't meant to be disrespectful to Owens or his family. And the death of Owen Hart remains a painful chapter in the Hart family and a polarizing event in WWE's history. Bret Hart, along with many fans, have never forgiven McMahon for the role WWE played in Owens' tragic demise, and the decision to keep the show going that night. It's a decision that will forever be part of the Vince McMahon complex legacy, an event where entertainment and tragedy collided, and the fallout is still remembered decades later. Then there's the Chris Benoit tragedy, a very different yet equally heartbreaking incident. Benoit murdered his wife Nancy and their son Daniel in 2007 before taking his own life. The news sent shockwaves throughout the wrestling world and triggered an intense media storm, and the whole accident was being blamed on a steroid abuse outburst apparently. So what followed was WWE initially honored Benoit with a tribute show before the horrific details of the murder-suicide became known, leading to McMahon and the WWE immediately distancing themselves from Benoit's legacy. The documentary reflects on this decision and the immense scrutiny that followed, particularly regarding Benoit's long history of head trauma and the possible brain damage from concussions, which many believe contributed to his tragic actions. In discussing both Owen Hart and Chris Benoit, the documentary paints a picture of the immense risk and pressures wrestlers face, as well as the challenges McMahon has encountered in balancing entertainment with safety and the well-being of his performers. The deaths of Hart and Benoit brought WWE's practices under the microscope, raising serious questions about the company's culture, wrestling safety, and Vince's role in their devastating events. But what was more surprising was The Undertaker and Stone Cold's reaction to all of this. The McMahon documentary had several wrestling icons, including Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker reacting to the horrific news in ways that reveals the deep complexity of the situation. Stone Cold, who's always been a straight shooter, is skeptical about the widespread belief that Benoit's brutal actions were solely a result of CTE, a brain condition caused by repeated head trauma. He questions the idea that CTEs could fully explain the horror that unfolded that day, suggesting that there may be more at play. He'll go on to say in the documentary, "I get it, chair shots can lead to concussions, but Austin also says, but to do something that extreme, I'm not convinced that it's just CTE." Then there's The Undertaker, whose approach to the situation with a quieter, more effective tone. He knew Benoit as a respected peer, a man who was intensely dedicated to his craft, but like the rest of the world, he was fully rocked when the full story emerged, stating, "I was in disbelief." The Undertaker recalls, "How could someone like Chris do something so monstrous? It just didn't add up." So while in the documentary Undertaker didn't dismiss CTE entirely, he was careful not to place all the blame on it. He acknowledges the importance of wrestlers' safety and better medical care, but he maintained that there was no way to fully understand what was going on in Benoit's mind in those final days, quoting, "We may never know what drove him to that point." So what episode 4 showed is that Austin and Undertaker's illustrate the difficult and uncomfortable reality of Benoit's tragedy. So while Austin's skepticism about CTE reflects an old school mentality of his generation and an era where wrestlers endured brutal mashes, often without consideration of the long-term effects, meanwhile, The Undertaker's emotional reaction captures the personal betrayal many wrestlers felt, trying to reconcile the Chris Benoit they knew with the man who committed such unthinkable acts. Together, their reactions paint a vivid picture of how Benoit's tragedy split the wrestling world, but also the fans, as the fans' reaction to the two legends was comical and at the same time was furious considering what we know now about head trauma. So overall, the McMahon documentary may not bring anything new to die-hard fans, but it still offers a fascinating glimpse into the inner workings of WWE and Vince McMahon's towering presence in the wrestling industry.